Hello everyone, SMA Watts here, and we are going to do a deck tech today for Legacy Tribal Wars Kaleidoscope. We're going to be doing Naya Wizards, and I know when I think of Naya, the first thing that comes to my mind is like shamans and like beasts and maybe some cats. Definitely zoo. But there actually are some fairly good wizards, and we get a pretty good mix of effects that have a good synergy together, as well as a pretty powerful array of support cards. So that's why I decided to go with it. Kaleidoscope inherently has some intrinsic complications it adds to deck building. So for those of you that aren't completely aware what Kaleidoscope is, it is every card has to be multicolored, except for your lands, because that would be impossible. Before we get any further, let's take a moment and mourn the death of version 3. I used to do my deck techs using version 3, even if I was going to play using version 4, or the beta, or shiny, whatever you want to call it. Now it's just the client. And I liked it because I could organize the cards in such a way that my train of thought could flow through, and it helped keep me where I wanted to be. It helped keep me going from point to point where I wanted to be, and help my it kept me organized. In version 4, you can't sort the cards the way you can in version 3 in a deck. You can like have them all in like a row, put them in any order you want as long as it's all one long row, but that's kind of awkward to record. You can have them sorted by like in piles by like converted mana cost, but that's not particularly useful. You can use like the card view, which each card is just shown with how many with the number it has. But in order to sort those, you have to sort them by like converted mana cost, which just isn't how it's not particularly constructive. You can sort them by color, which is useful but not ideal. Or you could sort them by like collector number, and that one's a winner, because I know when I'm looking at my deck, I often wonder which one came first in their set between my cards. I have no idea why you would ever sort a deck by collector number. I can't even fathom what use you get out of that. So I'm hoping using PowerPoint setup here that it'll keep me organized, and hopefully I'll be able to do slightly better deck techs, since everything's a little bit more laid out ahead of time. It's a little less on the cuff. All right, so let's get started without any further ado. These are the wizards of the various guilds we're playing. Casale, by the way, is it's a guild. It's a guild back on Alara. So first off, we have our Boros. First off, you might notice most of these guys are 2/2s for 2, which is pretty reasonable. You can get a lot of 2/2s or a lot of like 3/3s and 3/2s for 2 though when you're playing with multicolored creatures, because multicolored creatures are intrinsically more powerful because they're harder to cast. I wanted to sidestep them being harder to cast and actually go for them being easier to cast by focusing on hybrid mana, which is why we're playing a lot of guild cards. Since every land in our deck produces either white, it produces 2 of one of our colors. So there's no combination of lands that don't let us go Selesnya Guildmage into Boros Reckoner. So, that's just important. That we don't get stuck with awkward mana draws. So right off the bat, our first one we have is Boros Guildmage. 2 mana 2/2, like most of them. For 1 and a red, it gives a creature haste until end of turn. I'm sure there are uses for that, but I imagine I'll use it maybe once. Just when I'll get flooded and be like, creature on turn 4, give it haste and attack. But more importantly, it can give my creatures first strike. And first strike is, in my opinion, a little bit of an underrated ability. It is better on defense than it is on offense. Like, if I have 2 or 3 creatures, you can't really attack in if I have untapped mana with the Boros Guildmage, because you might just end up with some very unfavorable trades. The threat of activation on it's just huge. Boros Reckoner is just a brick house. 3 mana 3/3 is, I mean, there was a time when that was unheard of in Magic, but nowadays that's just lower end of powerful. The fact that he can gain First Strike makes him incredibly potent. And when you synergize it with his other ability, of whenever he takes damage, he deals damage to a target, he becomes, like, unless you're playing black in Kaleidoscope, because black has all of the Terror Terminate style effects, it's really hard to not 2-for-1 yourself to deal with him. And sometimes in combat, sometimes he'll generate a 3-for-1. Because if they have to throw 2 creatures in front of him to deal with his First Strike ability, he then, he kills one, maybe kills the other, and then hits a third. So, or you just don't, you don't give him First Strike. He's powerful. Kasali Pride Mage. It is a 2-mana 2/2, but it attacks for 3, which makes it very nice. It synergizes very well with our other 2 and 3 drops, since, for instance, going turn 3 Boros Reckoner, turn 4 Kasali Pride Mage, attack with mana open to give him First Strike, you're probably getting in for 4. Also, there are a lot of very powerful enchantments. There are very few artifacts that are legal because of the color constraints of Kaleidoscope. There are some Esper creatures. I think Esper was the one that was artifacts. But other than that, there's not. It's pretty rare. A few other, they're all from Shards of Alara. But more importantly, there's enchantments. There's a lot of super powerful enchantments. Once again, gold cards tend to be more powerful. Enchantments tend to be hard to deal with and often can take over games. So gold enchantments tend to be really, really hard to deal with. Assembled Legion, all of the entire, I'm pretty sure it's a full cycle of 10 of the hybrid mana. If your creature is color A, gets +1/+1 and some ability. If your creature is color B, it gets +1/+1 and some ability. Like Steel of the Gods had, giving the creature +2/+2 potentially and lifelink and unblockable, is just it's almost unbeatable if you can't kill the creature in response or blow up the enchantment. Now, our other 2 guild mages, while they look very different, actually are almost the same card. They both, for 4 mana, produce a 1/1 dude. One of them it's haste. The other one, it's a Sapperling. For, Sapperling shenanigans that we're not playing. And then they both have a pump effect that affects your whole team. The Sunham Guild Mage's pump is a little cheaper, but the Selesnya Guild Mage's pump buffs toughness as well. Both of these guys threaten to take over a stalled board state very quickly. Then we go into our supporting staff. Now, part of the reason I wanted to play Naya is I specifically wanted to play these 2 cards. Bloodbraid Elf and Kitchen Finks are very powerful. Bloodbraid Elf, BB, the biggest beating ever. It's banned in Modern for a reason. Cascade is a broken mechanic. I mean, yes, we might be Cascade. There are 16 cards in our deck are 2 mana 2/2 or Grizzly Bears that will Cascade into sometimes, and that's not as amazing. There are also a lot of powerful cards we can Cascade into. Boros Reckoner, Kitchen Finks, Lightning Helix. We have a lot of very strong cards that we can flip off of a Bloodbraid Elf. We also have no cards that are awkward. One of the problems with him in Jund every once in a while is you'd play a Bloodbraid Elf onto an empty board, flip a Maelstrom Pulse, and be like, well, meh. The worst, you were like, I attack for 3. Kitchen Finks, on the other hand, is just amazing value. A 3 mana 3/2 is good enough. I probably wouldn't play a 3 mana 3/2 by itself. A 3 mana 3/2 with Persist, I'd probably be strongly considering playing. The fact that he gains 2 life when he enters the battlefield both times, he can swing a race really fast. Block trade, gain 2 life, block trade, gain 2 life, block trade. and your opponent's miles behind. Our removal and utility. We're running 2 Curse of Chains. I'm really just not sure if this card's good enough. Like, I've played it in Pauper. It's good enough in Pauper, but it's a very weak pool. But there aren't a lot of good removal spells in our colors. I could have ran Pit Fight, but our creatures aren't big enough to reliably win a Pit Fight. I could have ran some combat tricks, and I considered that. But I wanted an ability that would answer something like an opposing Reckoner or just a big fat creature. We just needed. I mean, there is like a 4 mana 7/4 or something like that attacks every turn to Fable. There's a lot of powerful creatures that could potentially be in this card pool, and Curse of Chains is just an almost unconditional answer. As long as the creature doesn't have an ability that untaps itself, and as long as the creature doesn't have a super powerful tap effect that's useful during your upkeep. I mean, some cards it's like, well, this guy untaps a land. It's like, that's not useful in your upkeep. We're running 4 Lightning Helix, 4 War Leader's Helix. They're just, in my opinion, two of the best removal spells you can have. They kill a lot of things. Protection is both less common when you look at gold cards and far more valuable. Like, in this format, protection is a very powerful effect because usually it's going to hit more cards than it would otherwise. On the same token, the protection creatures that are multicolored tend to either be old and kind of dirtily, or just really powerful. Like, there's not a middle ground there. And Boros Charm is just it does so much. It can close out a game by just lava axing your opponent. It can blow out your opponent by when they make an attack, you just make a bunch of blocks that would be trades, and then all my guys don't die, your team's dead. I've never found a time when Double Strike was the ability I wanted to give. Like, I'm sure there is some niche case, like if you play Ball Lightning and then you Boros Charm your Ball Lightning, it's better than doing 4 to them. Like Spark Trooper, for instance, would be, if I was running that, I could see being like Spark Trooper, Boros Charm it has Double Strike, gain 12, you take 12. But other than that, like, Boros Charm's a powerful card, but I've never found that third ability to be terribly relevant. Our mana base is pretty straightforward. We're running 20 lands because we have a really low mana curve. Even though we have the ability to use more mana, our curve does stop at 4, and we only have 4 cards at the top of it. We're running not quite a full set of traditional duels. I just didn't have the Tegas yet. I will say, as a side note, thank you, Vintage Masters, for dropping the price of dual lands below the price of shock lands. I picked up Plateaus because they were cheaper than Sacred Foundries. Other than that, we're running. It's also possible that the Temple Gardens maybe should be Razor Verge Thickets. I think that's the name of the card. But it's also possible they should be Stirring Wildwoods. I considered all of those, but this is the land mix I went with. The Raging Ravines are okay. The 2 that require explaining. The Jungle Shrine taps for all 3 of our mana, which could be relevant. I'm pretty sure we're going to be pretty consistent without worrying too much about it. But we don't have any turn 1 plays, so I'm not worried about losing anything by our first land coming into play tapped. I'm actually more worried about the Copperline Gorge being a 4th land that comes into play tapped than I am about the Jungle Shrine. The Raging Ravine, on the other hand, I looked at that as going, well, our curve does stop at 4, but I want to run a full 20 lands. So by running 2 man lands, I give myself an out to being flooded. It's flood insurance. Basically, it's only a land if I really need it to be a land. Otherwise, I pay a bunch of mana and it becomes a relatively respectable creature. Like, you can't ignore a Raging Ravine for too many turns before it just becomes way too big to deal with. Here is our deck list. I'm going to stop on it for a couple seconds, so if you want to read it, or, this is what we've been looking at, but I felt it was worth including. And these are the cards that I strongly considered but did not make the cut. Assemble the Legion is just crazy bonkers. Like, it is a card that if your opponent doesn't, it basically gives them 3 turns. If you don't remove Assemble the Legion or win the game in 3 turns after it's been played, you're probably not going to overcome the just tide of dudes Assemble the Legion's going to make. Problem is, it's a 5-drop. If I was running 24 lands and much more of a Naya mid-range, like with lots of 3-drops and 4-drops, yeah, I could see running Assemble the Legion as just a great finisher. We're not that fast. Legion's Initiative, it looks like it would be like Honor of the Pure deck, but it's actually really random. I mean, some of our creatures are going to get +1/+1. Some of them are going to get +1/+0. Some of them are going to get +0/+1. All of our creatures will get something. And it gives you Wrath Insurance, but I'd really want my creatures to have like a come into play effect. I really don't like the idea that, it can be used as a fog. You block and then exile all your guys. But that feels so... Why am I not just playing a better card? Like, I'd just rather Boros Charm and make my guys indestructible and maybe kill 1 or 2 of his guys. So, meh. Worth considering? Don't quite think it was powerful enough. I think if we had more come into play effects and more creatures like Kitchen Finks, yes. As we are, no. Martial Glory. Once again, I think Boros Charm was just more powerful. But it is a very, very potent trick. I think if it did one more thing, like anything else, like if it was like, oh, this creature gains first strike or lifelink or something, it would have made the cut. But as it is, it's just a giant growth you can split up. And while a nice trick, and this sort of stands in for all of the random tricks that are in the Naya colors that you can play, Boros Charm just felt like it was more powerful and gave me a little bit more utility since it's never dead. Rise of the Hobgoblins, I considered it, and then I realized I'd rather run Assemble the Legion, and then I realized I don't really want a 5-drop. And Rise of the Hobgoblins is really bad if it's not at least like a 4 or 5-drop. Like, a 5-drop Rise of the Goblins, you're like, yeah, 3/1/1s. Meh. Goblin Ball is not as impressive. Like, I don't know when I would actually want this card in particular. Scourge of the Nobilis, super powerful. Potentially backbreaking. Like, if you put that on a Boros Reckoner, you're probably going to win the game very quickly. But it does open you up for huge 2-for-1s. And I really just don't like playing cards like that are so high variance. Like, Madcap Skills would fall into this list as well. The green, red, and green, white one also were on... Well, Madcap Skills obviously wasn't considered. Madcap Skills just falls in the list of cards that are really powerful, but I don't like to play because sometimes you just lose the game because of them. The green, red one and the green, white one, I forget what their names are, but they were also in consideration. And one of the cards that was originally in the mix for the list was Stormbind. But ultimately, I found that because of the guild mages, and we have enough sinks for our mana, and we have enough uses for extra lands because we have sinks for our mana, that turning our extra lands into shocks and spending a card to do it just wasn't quite what I wanted. Like, the problem with Stormbind is that you're basically, like, off the bat, you're spending 2 cards to do 2 damage and 5 mana. And that's just so bad that first time. So that's what we're going to be playing. I'd like to know if you guys prefer this method of doing the deck techs, or if you'd like me to try and use the version 4 and do them sort of like I used to.